Hi everyone, welcome to Pit Stop 17, and today we have Benji Smith back, and really interesting topic and one that I've thought about a lot. Call it over the last couple of months, and kind of centering on this idea of perfection and affirmation, searching for it. And it resonates a ton with me. Just kind of our similarities and our journeys where we've both recently started putting out content. For me, like very much so for the first time. And just kind of the journey around that and some of the feelings that go along with that. So excited to have you here, Benji. And I guess first of all, just going into what you've started creating for content, and just why did you start creating it? What made you want to create content?
I'm happy to be here again. We had coffee this week, and right before you had mentioned bringing me back, and I thought it was a great opportunity, just reflecting on the first one that we had, and really all the conversations we have. So I'm stoked to be here, and um, the content that I started putting out was kind of something. I think social media is a tool, has a lot of power to it, and you and I had spoken earlier this week about consumption too,
Mhm.
whether it's food or content or other people's opinions. It doesn't really matter. We consume it all. And I realize with social media, especially the way we curate our own feeds, it's just another form of consumption. And I realized that the stuff that I was consuming was quite off. So about a year ago, I started really unfollowing certain accounts, and it was a blind decision almost. It was kind of like an impulsive one. I wasn't thinking too much about it. It was okay. It was kind of that Marie Kondo, does it spark joy? And just click to unfollow or follow new content to try and really curate my feed. And I realized that there was a real opportunity in the way that content is structured, the consistency in how it's structured, and how we can use social media as an opportunity to share and to learn. And it's not just about selfies and how beautiful we all look and this stuff that isn't really representative, I think, of our true lives. And how can we use that as an opportunity where if we're on social media every day, where we can focus on the things that we do daily, and instead of it just being reading something long form, for example, like, or listening to something long form like a podcast or a book, how can we take these short, I call them espresso shots. That term is actually copied from somebody else who did a similar concept. Short form espresso shots that can be applied to everyone's daily lives. So if we can change something in a day consistently, or every day consistently, then over a long term, we can actually make sustainable change. And that's something I focused on really early on, with coaching. And now I just realized, especially at the beginning of the year, is a great opportunity I was doing it face to face with people, but it's a great opportunity to actually record myself, get more comfortable in front of a camera, and start sharing it with other people.
Very cool. And touching on that, I'm more curious for when you started unfollowing a lot of those accounts, was it, more to get away from negativity, or was it like vanity, or they just didn't align so much with you? Like kind of, what, or was it just, case by case, how you were feeling about that specific profile? And why you started unfollowing some of those?
Negativity, I think, was a big one, and negativity is kind of subjective. The stuff that I deemed as negative to where I wanted to go, and I
Mhm.
had a very clear idea and understanding and vision. You and I spoke about intention this week. I had a very clear intention of where I wanted to go, and if I was following anybody and looking at their content daily where that didn't serve my purpose and my motivation, it was a quick unfollow. Also, ridiculous stuff. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but we really are what we consume, whether it's food or content. So I kept some of the ridiculous ones because they're fun sometimes. It's nice to just relax and, have a good laugh. But there's other ones that were just not, it's just bad content. It's kind of
Yeah.
polluting my brain. And then the other one was vanity, especially with my experience in health and wellness and fitness, we kind of just blindly follow people. And it wasn't that I never really taken the chance to really go through what I had followed. And the vanity stuff is great for goals, but I think if we consume too much of it and it fills too much of our feed and then what we're consuming every day, it sets this unrealistic expectation, especially with the way we as a society look at vanity today and the ability to add filters and edit photos. Very little of what we actually see online is legit. And as I've gotten older and I've been more experienced with social media, knowing how much of it is illegitimate is part of the reason why I started unfollowing a lot of it. And really just curating, I think, like I said, curating what I was consuming. It was it was really important. So really, yeah, a bit of everything, and then following more like-minded people.
Yeah.
It didn't need to necessarily be people who had 1 million followers or 2 million followers. I feel like when we get to that point, we have that many people following an account. It does get curated in a very specific way. Those old school marketing tactics where it's never what it seems, uh, following other people that were in my boat, 5, 6, 700 followers who are in the same kind of, like I said, same boat as me and passionate about the same things. It's not about the number or the likes or anything. It's, what is the stuff I'm consuming, and am I surrounding myself with like-minded people? I think we talked in our last episode about being the sum of the 5 closest people in our lives. Well, what if we were the sum of the closest 20? And how many of those 20 are actually just on social media? We don't actually have physical interactions with them.
Yeah, it's so funny that you said that actually, because that's exactly what came to my mind was that
Yeah.
saying, being the sum of the 5 closest people. And so much of it is what you're taking in too, right?
Hmm.
And that whole idea of because we're so connected, more so than we ever have been in human history, it's different now, right? It's not only the people that we're around, but it's also the information that we're taking in and the perspectives that we're taking in through social media, through the internet, through articles, through videos, whatever it might be.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought that up, and it's always interesting for me hearing other people's perspectives on things and like their reasoning behind doing it. And why I say that is because, again, like this, the past couple of months has been the first time in my entire life that I've ever put out content, right? And um, for me, and I've had the question a couple of times of, why did you start a podcast? And it comes back to the big realization for the thing that I wanted the most in the world, and the thing that I was the most afraid of was being in the spotlight, of being seen, right? And so for me, it was completely an exercise in pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And like, it doesn't matter if anybody sees it, if 2 people see it, whatever it might be, the act of just putting it out there helped me push me out of that comfort zone, helped push me in my personal development. And I hope that other people find value in it, whatever that might be, whether it's entertainment, education, perspective, seeing that other people struggle with things that they also struggle with, whatever it might be. But at the same time, it's been so fulfilling for me, and so much growth has happened for myself. And it's kind of the mode of transportation that I chose to do that
Hmm.
in. And so yeah, it's why I'm always interested. And there can be such different reasonings and driving forces behind why somebody is doing something, even if they look almost exactly the same or very, very similar.
Yeah. And you had mentioned having different perspectives on it and the reasons we're putting it out, and we have this experience of ourselves. I only really realized this when I started recording myself, because we have this outward experience of ourselves that is very reflective of what's going on internally, but
Mhm.
we don't know what the other person is seeing a lot in conversation. So it's really interesting when you don't have that person. Well, I guess in this situation, you and I, like I have you across from me, but when I'm filming the videos, it's me talking to me, and I'm going to release some bloopers too, because it's hilarious to watch me function. And because when we have this outward function and we're in ourselves the entire time, we don't know what it looks like from the person sitting across. from me. And even you and I spoke earlier this week about language that we use are, I mean, for me, it can be very quick thinking sometimes. And the quick thinking isn't always good because then it doesn't come out the way that I want. So just having that outward reflection where I could sit and it gets annoying listening to myself all the time, but swipe through and say, I like this, or how do I make myself feel more natural in this setting? Because nothing's really changed. I just don't have somebody, I'm kind of talking to myself. That's been a huge opportunity for growth for me. I think in school, when we're growing up, we're put in front of classes a lot to present. And then if you end up in the right job, you're also responsible for presenting information. But it's something I fell out of in the last couple of years. So to have that opportunity to grow, that was one of the things that caught me off guard while creating content, especially when I was recording in front of other people and they were talking about ways that I could be more comfortable. And I'm comfortable in myself 99% of the time. So why the 1% of the time I'm in front of the camera does it kind of go off the cliff? And that's been a huge, huge growth process for
Mm,
me. Facial expressions, even just little stuff. It's really crazy. So I feel you when you're talking about putting content out there, and it's a huge growth process. It really is.
yeah. And it's so funny too, and how different it is. And even, seeing and knowing that, it's you in front of your camera, a lot of first
Hmm.
person, and that still makes me wildly uncomfortable. Like, I've gotten a lot better with having conversations with people. And, I think that I flow more naturally like that anyways. And at
Yeah.
the same time, it's just a completely different experience than having to talk to yourself, having to share your thoughts. And
Hmm.
something that I want to work on a little bit more, but something I definitely struggle with still. So, um, and so the next one that I want to talk about is, some of that maybe self-talk. And before you would actually put everything out, what was one of the biggest worries that you had, or one of the things that was holding you back the most, from putting yourself out there, and if there was anything?
I think I took growing up in the being born in the early 90s. I really got introduced to social media once it had first kind of started. We would go to school and come home and all go on MSN Messenger. ICQ was a big one at the time. My first social media account was Nexopia. I
Yes.
never had a MySpace, but some really like OG kind of platforms. And it's so different now, but I think growing up growing up in that era, I think I used it as a crutch for affirmation and acceptance and feeling the need to be heard and putting myself out there so I am feeling like I'm heard.
Mhm.
It for me it became a very unhealthy relationship. I only really brought some awareness to it in my early 20s. And I remember actively setting intention and making a commitment to say, I can't go outward for affirmation and acceptance all the time. I need to be the first stop for myself. So I made an active effort and set intention to distance from social media over the last 2 or 3 years. Maybe not distance from social media because I was still actively using it, but I mean actually posting my own stuff. And it wasn't until I wasn't comfortable doing something like this until I had reimagine that relationship that I had with social media. Because if I had went into something like I'm doing now with that same understanding that I had a couple of years ago, wanting affirmation and acceptance, feeling the need to be heard by other people, it wasn't going to work. This is something that I wanted to put out there where I want to do it because it brings me fulfillment. And then if sharing that perspective with other people is valuable to them and also helps them along their journey, then great, I'm winning at that point. But if I'm doing it for the wrong reasons, where it's I need this acceptance or fulfillment from other people, not because I want to do this, but I'm doing this because of that affirmation, it wasn't going to be right. It's not it's not the person I want to be. It's not the life that I want to live. And if I feel that way, then it's going to come through in the content too. The beginning of this year, when I really started thinking about it, really for me, the content is kind of a vehicle to where I want to go. I really want to, I've been really passionate about the one-on-one stuff. I'm not the type, like you said, to be I'm in the party, and if something like happens and someone needs to speak up, I'll be one of the first people to speak up. But I'm not the one who sits in the center of the circle all the time and woe is me. And it's just not who I am. I think as a kid trying to live like an introvert, trying to live an extroverted life, extroversion is interesting in our society. It's something that's highly rewarded a lot of the time. And I think it forces introverts to deviate from who they truly are because we reward extroversion in our society. The introverts are kind of the quiet, weird ones that, sit outside of the circle and don't really say much and just kind of observe. We don't reward that. So when I wanted to get into to coaching, it's a very it's kind of an extroverted to put out content like you and I are doing. It's kind of an extroverted lifestyle, at least the way that it's rewarded nowadays. The most extroverted, crazy, wild ones are the ones who get millions and millions of followers. But I realized when I wanted to switch that I could use this as a tool. And instead of hiding from my extroverted personality, which comes through once in a while, to try and welcome it. And it's a balance. It's not just introversion all the time. It's also being extroverted. And when I really wanted to make a switch, if I'm not the person to go in the middle of the circle and start screaming like "woe is me," what's an avenue that I can go down to bring that same exposure to the things that I'm passionate about, and how can I share that perspective? And social media is one of the biggest tools we have right now. So at the beginning of the year, when even before quarantine, when I was kind of questioning what I had done so far career wise, and it's a term called I think it's in Japanese culture. It's called ikagi, where it's the center of kind of four circles, like a Venn diagram where there's four circles and they kind of interact in the middle. Something that I'm passionate about, something that I'm good at, something that I can make money at, and I forget what the fourth one is now. But coaching was one of them, and it's not even coaching; it's relationship building. You and I talked about being of service this week. So the social media is really just the conduit into that whole realm that I want to move into professionally. And if I'm going to do that one on one, the best way to get better at it is by watching myself communicate and
Yeah,
try and change some of the bad habits. You and I talked about like and this week, two words that are kind of thrown around that I know are poor when we're talking. And I've really, even since our first podcast, watching it, I'm like, I just said it. I'm like, after work watching it the first time, I said to myself that this is an area that I want to be better in.
hmm,
And the only way I would have figured it out was by watching us talk for an hour, watching myself talk for 30 seconds at a time. Um, so it's really, really just been a great opportunity to shift career wise, shift my mindset, push myself, and like you said, push myself and ourselves in a realm that neither of us have a ton of experience in. So long term, it would be a huge benefit.
for sure. And you know what? While you're talking there, one of the biggest things that kind of stood out for me, it was this idea of really trying to lean into your natural tendencies instead of
Hmm.
pretending to be someone that you're not, right? And sometimes
Hmm.
that means, in different situations, you're going to, turn up the dial on specific parts of your personality or who you are, what do you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
But if you are going against who you actually are, people
Hmm.
are going to see through that. And it might not be right at the beginning, but eventually they will. And so if you're extremely introverted, you've always been a super introverted person, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden you're trying to act like the most extreme extrovert, there's going to be some friction there, and people are going to see that there's going to be a disconnect. And so I that's where I really try, and we've talked about this actually a lot on um, even just the setup of like the podcast or our conversations that we have of I'm very much off the hip, and that's how my brain works, and that's how I
Hmm.
like it, and trying to lean into that, where if I try to rehearse something too much, it's not only very difficult, because it's me trying to push away from my natural tendencies, but it doesn't flow as well either. And it comes back to this is coming up in my mind of call maybe a month or two ago when I was launching my new project, Craft Text. Of I wanted to do a video on the front page, which is great, like no problem. And it was a selfie video, and I had a script. I was like, I'll just talk. And it probably took me 40 takes, right?
Hmm.
Because it's not what, I mean, one, I don't have a ton of practice at it, but two,
Yeah.
it's also extremely rehearsed. I start getting in my head. I start, going down this rabbit hole. Whereas when I just have a conversation with somebody, I can just talk and just have the conversation. And so, um, sure, there's other places that I want to improve on, and I think that incorporating different elements and trying them out to see if you're actually, not good at them, or if it's just a mental barrier. And we talked about that too. Of a lot of times we just get in our own way. But really looking into that and trying to distill down, what you care about, who you are, how you like doing things, and what you're good at, and then using that as the base.
And I feel like there's some things that we are good at,
Hmm.
and we've only set blocks up for us to hone and develop those skills. I think it's the nature versus nurture thing, where I think naturally we're going to have skill sets, but there's nurturing to every skill.
Hmm.
The first mentor I fell under, one of the things, especially kind of being lost, getting out of school, what my true passion or purpose was or is, the things that I wanted to do career wise or personally or professionally and succeed in. He spoke to playing into our strengths, not our weaknesses. And that was nothing that I'd ever heard before, because everyone always says to hone or sharpen our weaknesses because those are our gaps.
Hmm.
But especially in business, like with your venture and any of the businesses that I've been involved in too, that's what you have a team for. That's why you build a good team. And he actually compared it to basketball, because he grew up playing basketball, played high level basketball. I know you've played high level sports too, and I mean, I played high school sports, but that's like high level, right? High school. And you don't, like, if somebody can't throw a football, you don't want to stick them at quarterback.
Yeah.
But just because they can't throw a football doesn't mean they can't catch a ball. So then you stick them at wideout, and it's not like the team is any worse for wear.
Hmm.
Having one at one position and one at the other position, you play into people's strengths. And business is no different. That comparison to sport was huge for me.
Yeah.
We play into our strengths. It's one of the most important things we can do, because the gap between what we're strong at and what we're weak at is so big. The chance, like, even if we close it a little bit, it's not going to make that much of a difference.
Hmm.
And don't get me wrong, there's some weaknesses I think that we can actively work on.
Yeah.
Things like you were talking about, affirmation, acceptance, all that kind of external validation. I think that's something that we can actively work on. I don't think that's a weakness. I think that's a conditioning thing. So really deciphering what's a conditioning, the nurturing part, and what's a natural tendency, and running with them. We shouldn't shy away from our strengths. We shouldn't shy away from a lot of our weaknesses too, because we have to know what we're bad at in order to know what we're good at.
For sure. Yeah. And, going back to that of avoiding vulnerabilities is different than, and making, trying to close up those vulnerabilities is different than focusing on your weaknesses, right? And,
Yeah.
like using that example of, you know, the person that can't throw the ball at all, but can go and catch and play a wide receiver. If they put in the exact same amount of work and the exact same amount of time, their growth at that position that they're, more natural, they have a better natural tendency towards, is going to be
hmm
exponentially bigger than something that they aren't naturally good at, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's something that I've really been trying to do, and kind of going back to something else that you said too, for me, on which is a different view on social media, and I don't think it's a super popular one, but I think that a lot of it comes down to our natural predisposition, and a lot of times social media just amplifies the things that we already have within us, right?
hmm
And going back to when you're talking about almost using it as seeking for affirmation when you were younger, or the attention, or whatever it might be. Um,
hmm
I think that that's within us a lot of times before social media, before we start participating in social media. And, sure, it might be magnified a little bit, but I think it's there already. And, what I really resonate, something that you said, was going back and working on yourself first, right? And repairing those things within yourself before you start putting yourself out there again, right?
hmm
And that's really, been true in my life. where the reason I didn't put anything out on social media ever, and it's so funny of having those nostalgia moments of thinking about MSN Messenger and Nexopia. Um,
ICQ.
yeah, everything. And realizing I still never put anything out. Like I never had a profile picture on Nexopia. I would sit there. I don't even know what I would do. I would sit there for hours. Like there's a girl in my class that I really liked, and I'd try to get her to message
Just follow it. Buy
me.
premium to see who's looking at your account.
Yeah. But you know, that like fear of judgment and fear of putting myself out there and fear of being seen was there before, right? And so I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
even want to participate because I was immobilized by fear. And sometimes, and it's a lot of came back to a lot of self-worth issues as well.
Hmm.
I hated how I looked in pictures. I didn't think I looked good. I didn't want to put them up there.
Yeah.
It's like, I looked terrible no matter what the picture was. It was just, and then every 1 to 2 years, I'd find one and be like, oh, okay, that's good. And then switch all the profile pictures to that one, right? And
Yeah.
just kind of how I always operated. And I think that's a point that's being missed. There's lots of conversation around social media, the effects that it has on us and what we're consuming, everything like that. But I think that people are missing that aspect of looking in at themselves first.
Yeah.
Like, what is this bringing out within me? A lot of times
Hmm.
it's not necessarily the cause or the root cause of something,
Yeah.
because a lot of times it's there already. And going back and addressing those and looking at those first.
And I think that, and without going too far out there, I
Mhm.
think one of the things that you touched on, not being the root cause, that whole system of, I guess, symptom versus, so the idea in medicine, the way it works is that we treat symptoms, we don't treat root causes. So I say, oh, I have pain, so we treat pain, but a lot of the time we don't try and look at what the root cause is.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, in the system that we have in North America, western not North America but Western medicine, we're very good at treating symptoms, but we're not as good at treating the root causes unless they get to the tail end. I think you and I spoke this week, the tail end of it, where it's like, we need to treat this or you're going to die. We're great at that. But the root causes, a lot of the time, if you go into Eastern medicine, are spiritual and emotional. Those are the two biggest ones. Things like community are a huge piece. And it's really interesting to hear when you're talking about it, because I'm a firm believer that, like you said, start with what's going on in you first, because what's going on in you first and individually is going to replicate and duplicate in the rest of our lives. So if we have a home base that's very strong internally that we can always come back to, then it's going to be replicated externally. It's the idea of like manifestation a
Mhm.
lot of the time. But if we don't have those ducks in a row internally, or that strong internal house built, everything else that we build is also, it's going to be weak. It won't be strong. And it's really important when you're talking about this too, because we can put it out there as much as we want. We can be as successful as we want, get millions of followers on social media. Chances are the image, if we're not whole internally, the image that we're putting out externally is fake. And that means that the money that those people are making are fake, and the followers that they're making are also fake, and the likes that they're making are fake. And I know that might sound harsh, but in my eyes, in my opinion, it's true. And it's eventually might get to a point where, because what happens is a lot of people will get the things they seek externally, like money or affirmation, and then they still won't feel whole. And then sometimes when they get to that end goal, they'll come back and say, okay, I made it. It's not what I thought it was, or it didn't bring me what I thought it was going to bring me. And then they come back into it and into themselves. And but that's a long journey. And especially what happens if people don't actually make it to that end goal that they've set out to get 1 million followers or start monetizing it, then they're just chasing something externally their entire lives. What is it that's going to, stop and hold up the mirror and say, stop looking out, and, start looking in, and stop. I mean, you talked about shame and avoidance and all those things that prevent us from looking internally. How do we, how do we do that quicker? And that's with the social media, especially the content creation. That's what I've really been focusing on. Questioning, I think, is a huge thing. Is I don't need to question people, but we should question ourselves in a healthy way. And then sometimes I think I said last time, shut up and just get out of the way of myself.
Yeah.
I'm my own friend. Try and be my own friend. We also talked about that this week. Are we our own friend or are we our own enemy? I try and be my own friend, but sometimes I turn on myself.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't work out the way that I want it to every time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so funny that you bring that up. I just had this conversation yesterday with a good friend of mine where we talked about, the idea of money, right? And how so many people chase it, and a very small percentage is actually just for the money, right? Of when you go down a couple layers, and a lot of
Hmm.
times they don't even realize it themselves, but a lot of times it's what they're trying to fill a hole with, right?
Yeah.
Is that self-worth of, I feel like I'm not worthy, and therefore if I have money, I'll be worthy. Or, to show other people a self-worth of, if I have money, then other people will see me as worthy. Sometimes seeing of like, oh, rich people are happy and therefore I'll be happy if I'm rich. Right. And so it's so funny, the psychology of like so many people chase it, and the fact like the money itself is not actually what they're chasing a lot of times. So
It's true.
yeah. And so kind of in the same vein, and something that I'm really excited to talk about is this idea of perfection as well. Right. And I think it comes up a lot of times when we're putting something out for other people to see, right? Whether that be
Hmm.
on social media, whether that be like a school project, whether that be, making a speech, right, at a party or a wedding or a funeral, whatever it might be. But this idea of perfection, right, that it has to be perfect. And just sharing quickly first of, it is something that I have struggled with my entire life, is this idea of perfection. And now that I've looked at it more,
Hmm.
I've started to realize where it comes from. Of I need to be perfect to be loved, is where it came down for me, right? To be
Hmm.
worthy, to be loved, and all of that self worth, um, stuff. Of if I'm not perfect, then people won't like me. And so my entire life was about trying to be perfect and showing people that I'm perfect in every aspect of my life, and perfect to them, right? And so it even
Yeah.
comes up of how I interacted with them, of like who do I need to be to this person to be perfect in their eyes.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of times it is almost an excuse not to do something, right? And we use it as like, well, I can't do this because it won't be perfect. I can't put this out because it won't be perfect. Or
Hmm.
once it's perfect, I'll do it, right? And realizing that it'll never be perfect. And I think the biggest breakthrough for me personally was the realization that perfection is different in every single person's eyes, right? And so it is impossible to be perfect because everybody has a different definition of it,
Hmm.
right? And so
And
yeah, that was the big breakthrough for me. And what I've really tried to focus on is just like not allowing perfection to stop me from taking action. And yeah, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you struggle with perfection, and or how you see it manifest in other people.
it's interesting when you bring up topics like this because, especially when we spoke just before, and you had asked me, you said, these are some of the things that I'd like to talk about. I was thinking about perfection and my experience with it, and there was a long time I think with the same thing where we strive for perfection, not because we want to view ourselves as perfect, but because we want others to view ourselves as perfect. It really, for me, it never started with me. I always wanted to be perfect for other people, and I never stopped to think. I mean, you and I spoke earlier where what is perfect? So actually defining what we're talking about, and the communication and understanding piece of is kind of something I go back to all the time. It's not just self-talk, but it's talk with other people. Because if I'm speaking, I think conflict resolution is a great example. Conflict resolution isn't conflict and resolution. That's abrasive. Conflict resolution is communication and understanding, and agreeing that sometimes we're going to disagree because that's imperfect too. And that same kind of talking, the communication and understanding, we can have with ourselves. And we can't have that conversation with ourselves if our definition of perfect is wrong, right? So if my definition of perfect is being perfect for others, that's not my definition, right? I'm basing my definition on somebody else's views of me. So when we're dealing with other people, then too, we really need to define what perfection is and what perfect is to us, not what perfect is to other people. And it's funny because I think at a young age, especially when I was going through a lot emotionally in my late teens, I would always go to quotes of people I didn't know, and they're thought leaders, and I know them as thought leaders in this area now, but not when I was a kid. And really, it doesn't. We say, "Oh, it's cliche," and we disregard what they're saying a lot of the time because what else are they going to say? This is what everybody says. And there's one that's beauty is imperfection,
Mm.
right? That's one of them. And it's when we look at, for example, I always go back to this. I was in Philadelphia years back, and Philly is interesting because it's on the coast. So anyone who crossed the ocean and landed on the coast, they were a lot of the first settlers in the state. They landed on the east side, and then they kind of moved inland. And there was this one brick wall, and what had happened was they had built it and the foundation had shifted. And what they did was they stuck guide wire through this building from front to back to try and stabilize this building. So I took this photo. It was supposed to be a panorama of from the bottom to the top. So I kind of moved the camera all the way up. And if you shift a camera when you're doing that, it kind of looks broken. And I have this picture of this brick, and it's so cool. Like I looked at it and it's almost great because it is imperfect. And we think that we think that perfection doesn't have any imperfection, but the beauty in perfection is that everything is imperfect and nothing is the way that we think it's going to be. I don't remember one time in my life where I was like, this is the way it's supposed to be and this is the way it is and it's going to be. It never works out that way. And
Mm-hmm.
there's beauty in that. And then externally, from another perspective, I think perfection paralysis is kind of something I think about a lot, where if we want perfect all the time, it's not attainable. And I also feel like perfect is boring. There's nothing fun in perfect, right? The fun is knowing that everything is imperfect, and you might draw a line and it's not going to be straight, and it's great because it's not straight. If it's straight all the time, it's not fun. And if we're striving for perfect and perfect is kind of unattainable or it's subjective, it changes for everybody, then is it going to freeze us and it's going to motivate us to not do anything? And somebody actually else was talking to me about that, is he never realized that he was a perfectionist. And he said once he realized he was a perfectionist, he actually realized that that perfection and that striving to want to be perfect all the time, one is that external affirmation, like you had mentioned, but it also froze him and it motivated him to not do anything. And that was the last thing he wanted to do because he was such a hard worker. And so just knowing that it's a cycle and kind of a negative feedback loop, it was really interesting to hear from a different perspective. And then for me, from my perspective is I don't think perfection is something I strive for. I think it's something that I have to be consciously aware of all the time, especially if I'm editing a video, for example, and saying, oh, I don't really like the way this looks, or I don't really like the way that I sound here. What I'm going to notice about myself or the content that I'm putting out is very different than what the other person is going to notice. And if they notice the imperfections, then great. If they're striving and expecting perfection from me all the time, they're not somebody I want in my life. They're not somebody I want following my account or my content. They're not somebody I want supporting me. It's just not, because I don't want people in my life who are expecting perfection all the time, because that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're expecting perfection all the time, chances are that they're not being the realist versions of themselves. And like I said, I have to be very selective about the people I want in my life, and I need ones that are going to support me and my vision moving forward. So it's a hard truth, and people who expect perfection don't like that hard truth either, knowing that other people are going to be imperfect. And the ones who are comfortable being imperfect, they're not going to want to keep around. And it's really interesting. Like I said, when you mentioned it early on, I was kind of like, what am I going to talk about for this? And just as we've kind of opened it up in this conversation, it's everywhere. Accounts that I unfollowed on social media, I'm sorry. I love people, and I love the human body. I think as a kinesiologist, I love it and I appreciate it, and I love when people are able to do things to their human body that visually look beautiful. But I, it's not all. It's not all what it's cracked up to be, and I don't think the pictures that I see, especially with the fitness stuff, I don't think the pictures I see are very accurate all the time. There's a very small population that can make themselves look like that, and I have to stop telling myself that every body is supposed to look like that. That was a really big step.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, one of the things that really popped up for me when you're talking is that idea that we are also hyper aware because we are ourselves, right? And
Yeah.
you know, it also came up of like we're our own worst critic. And for me, that was so true for so much of my life. And you know, like I was, you know, multitudes times more harder on myself than anyone else could ever be, you know, to me.
Hmm.
And you know, it's always funny again because of, you know, really what it led down to was like insecurity, right? Insecurity in imperfection. And
Hmm.
a lot of times it was, you know, to show other people of like, oh look, like here, I'm not worthy, look how I screwed up. And it would be so funny how they'd be like, what are you talking about? Right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, for it can, a lot of times for presentations it would come up, right, of just like,
Yeah.
be like, oh, you did so great, and be, oh no, I you know, I fucked this up and I screwed up.
Yeah.
I had
Didn't
like
you catch that?
a little voice flutter there, and they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
And you
So
know, in your
true.
brain, you think that it's just like so outwardly obvious of like all these tiny little things, and you know, the truth is that 99% of people will have no idea even of what you're talking about, and even when you point it out to them, they might not even notice, right?
Yeah.
And you know, getting over that mental block as well, um, of just like, you know, you understand 100% what you're feeling because you're you,
Hmm.
right? And that doesn't mean that everybody else feels the exact same way or experience,
Yeah.
um, you know, the same emotions. And a lot of times it'll almost never be as, you know, what's the word, like vivid as what you're experiencing. And maybe they'll notice
Hmm.
it, but it'll be, you know, 25% of what you're experiencing. And yeah, really, really letting go of that. And you know, it's something that we've talked about a lot already, but you know, it goes back to that affirmation too, right? That if you, and to be honest, I've tried to get away from the word perfection in general, of just like, you know, going back to that of like perfection is the imperfection. And so it's not about perfection, it's about, you know, feeling good about yourself, about valuing yourself. um,
Hmm.
and so trying to get away from the word, but a lot of times looking for that outward affirmation to show you that you're good
Hmm.
enough, right? Or to show that you did a good job, because you know, you don't have it within yourself of like, I am happy with what I did, and so
Hmm.
it doesn't matter what other people say, like what the feedback is, or being able to take that feedback, you know, without the emotion attached to it, instead
Yeah.
of trying to gain value from that affirmation and needing that affirmation to come in, um,
Hmm.
for you to feel like what you did was valuable. And you know, how do you think about that external value, I'm sorry, affirmation, and you know, deriving value from it? Is that something that you've struggled with, or have you been able to steer clear?
I don't think it's something. We're social beings. I don't think that it's something that we can ever. I think that's a nature thing.
Mhm.
I even look at um, courting rituals in the wild, for example, where the prettiest looking animals are the ones that are selected. So I think bonobos are the ones they have. I think they have red butts or something. There's something about like the color of their butt
Yeah.
that makes them more appealing when they're being chosen by a female bonobo. And I don't know for sure if that's what it is, but just in general, courting rituals when birds dance for each other, the one with the prettiest dance, for example, or the prettiest looking feathers is the one that's selected. I think it is a nature thing. The interesting part, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and the interesting part is that we have our those are primal instincts that I'm talking about. We have our primal instincts, but as humans, we have the ability to downregulate them. So instead of to put it lightly, he was saying, we just want to be angry and we just want to fuck and like all this stuff, these primal instincts that we have. He says that as humans now, especially the way we've evolved, we have the ability to downregulate all of them. And if we have the ability to stay present and downregulate them, we're going to be happy. And so it's something that I don't think will ever go from me. It's something that I've definitely kept at bay, and I constantly have to remind myself of, especially when I'm in a lot of social settings with people I don't know, just like the natural things that I think would make anyone uncomfortable. To be honest, the ones who are extroverted, the ones who kind of go into a social setting and are extroverted, very kind of loud and talking to everybody. It's actually funny because I actually think that's a form of affirmation and insecurity too. It's just their way of curbing it. I'm the quieter one in the setting, but the one who's in the center of the circle is just as insecure as the one who's on the outside of the circle. It's usually the one who's kind of in between, right? It like doesn't really kind of lets things roll off their shoulders and everything. Those are the ones who I think are comfortable, more comfortable, I guess, with it. So it's really quite interesting to me. I think the big step for me is I realized romantically is a lot of it boils down to the fear of being alone, because what happens is when we're not accepted, I guess even going back to that nature discussion, or things that I would talk, the points that I was talking of with courting rituals. We're social beings and we don't want to be alone. Loneliness is a disease in my eyes. I really think it is. It's something as a comorbidity. I think it has a lot of impact on us. And this same affirmation and acceptance piece comes back to the same thing, because if we aren't gaining affirmation or being accepted by others, the fear is actually of being alone, right? And not being accepted means that we're alone in a pride of animals or a pack of animals. The one who is outcasted is then alone, and it's because they weren't accepted. And what I realized is then that fear of being alone for me boiled down to my romantic relationships, right? Fear of being alone romantically. And then what actually allowed me to overcome it was understanding that, I think you and I talked in the last podcast about it, is that we're all on different paths, but our end point in this form is the same. We're all going to die. And what I realized is that even if I were to get married, for example, in like a monogamous relationship, even if I were to get married, there's always going to be one person who is then alone at the end, because someone has to die first. I guess unless those two people were to die at the same time, but that isn't how I thought about it. And when I was able to put that in perspective, knowing that at some point in our lives we might actually be alone, how do I curb that fear to make sure that I'm not alone? And the only constant in my life is me. And if I'm not my own friend first, and I'm not my first stop first, that means that my entire life is dictated by others. And if that's the case, then who's leading my life? It's like being behind the steer of a boat. And it just, the boat's interesting because the ocean or the water is so open. Let's assume that we're on the ocean and not like a river or a lake where, you actually have to navigate a little bit. But if you're not controlling the boat, then who's controlling the boat? We're just wandering aimlessly. And that whole experience, especially a young version of me romantically, really gave me a lot of perspective, and helped me curb a lot of the affirmation and acceptance and insecurity that revolved around it. It really helped me put some of it at bay, because if I'm not worried about being alone, then if I stop worrying about being alone, then what do I really have to be worried about? Every stranger is a friend we haven't met yet,
Yeah.
right? We're all strangers at one point. So it's really quite interesting for me.
Yeah.
How about you?
That idea, that whole idea of no matter what, there are going to be periods in our time when we're alone, right? And whether that's
Yeah,
for a couple hours, for a couple days, for weeks, whatever it might be, right? Physically, emotionally, mentally, and why it's so important for us to have that relationship with ourselves, right?
yeah,
And again, not be seeking that external validation or support system or whatever it might be. And sometimes we need that, yes, but like you're saying, your first stop needs to be yourself.
yeah.
Going back to one of the other things that you were saying, and I don't remember where I heard it or read it, but the idea of social anxiety, and a lot of times where it comes from, in our
Hmm.
past as a human species, is that for most of our existence, we were very much struggling with life and death, of if
Yeah.
not, the modern world where you don't have to worry about not getting eaten by a tiger, right?
Yeah.
On a daily basis, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
like fighting for survival. However, our minds and our responses, our evolution has led us to the point where we still have that level of response, right?
Hmm.
We haven't caught up yet. And so a lot of times where it comes from is as we were developing when we were in more of tribal societies, was that you needed to be socially accepted. Otherwise, you would die because you could not
Yeah.
survive by yourself. You needed to be
Yeah.
part of the tribe, right? And that's why a lot of times those reactions to feeling alone or feeling like you're not accepted or wanting to be part of the group, that's why they're so strong. And for me, that really helped remove a lot of the shame around it, right? Of just like, oh, this is tough. This is a very strong reaction that my body is giving me. And that's okay because,
Hmm.
tens of thousands of years of evolution has gone into that reaction, right? And so
That's amazing.
accepting it, making peace with it, and then
Hmm.
um, again, yeah, that's been a huge thing for me. It's just removing the shame around it. Of instead of you shouldn't be feeling like this, is okay. You feel like this. Now let's see what we do next.
And honoring it sometimes. I
Yeah,
think what happens is we intuitively feel a certain way, and then the judge comes in and says, "Oh, you shouldn't feel this way," and it downplays what we're feeling intuitively. And sometimes downplaying that intuition is actually our demise because our intuition was right.
yeah,
And it's really that's why it's so important to it's the mind body connection like we're talking about, right? You have this physical response that's I mean it probably is some of it is like the primal our primal brain. I think a lot of people call it like the reptilian brain. A lot of it's going to be that too, but recognizing that that brain has been along for the ride a lot longer than this secondary evolution that we've come up with, the ability to downregulate it. And sometimes we need to trust it. And I think fear, anxiety, affirmation, a lot of the time we don't trust it. And it's interesting because even to kind of go full circle, when we first started talking about social media, if it's not real, intuitively we'll all know that it's not real. It's that secondary where we want to believe it. So instead of just trusting the intuition when we, see an account that's kind of funky or, see some images that maybe not be true, we convince ourselves that it's true. Or we just don't even honor our primal response to it that, something's up and something's weird.
yeah,
And it's interesting. There's a lot of opportunity and responsibility in what we're talking about is that spiritual development, the personal development. The podcast that actually yesterday touched on it, and he was saying indigenous communities. He said the indigenous were right, and everyone else was wrong. And we're going to start going through this period right now where we're going to have to honor this spirituality and community because we messed up. Luckily, we've caught it, I think, quick enough. But we each have an individual responsibility to now go back and take these, for example, super powerful tools like social media that are throwing a wrench in a lot of things for us and using them in the correct ways. They're a great tool. Just we brought the wrong tool to the job right now.
yeah. And what that brought up for me was it has been it's through a lot of reflection. One of the biggest takeaways that I've had over the past year has been learning to trust myself when I have those visceral reactions.
Hmm.
Like that spidey sense of like something's not right here, or this is wrong, or I shouldn't be doing this, or whatever it might be. Not that voice in your head where you over intellectualize it and
Yeah.
talk yourself out of it, but that visceral, like when that gut feeling of your body, you feel it, and like there's no other way to really explain it other than your body is telling you not to do something or to do something, and you don't have the reasoning behind it. It isn't because of this. It's just like something in you is telling you the answer, and
Hmm.
listening and trusting myself with those reactions.
And it's interesting because if we do stay present and we can quiet the monkey brain, like the monkey mind that's off the walls most of the time, if we can quiet it, we can actually tune into that intuition. And I think that intuition is really what, on a deeper level, is what will guide us to what we need to do, where we need to go. It'll tell us who we truly are, the things that we love, the things that we don't love. the things that will bring us happiness and the ones that won't bring us happiness. I
No.
think it's the most important thing if we can follow it, but it's kind of like you use the metaphor turning the dial up a little bit. You just have to, it's there. Like the dial's built. We just have to tune in and figure out which station it's on and which one comes in the clearest. And it's super important, and most of it is clarifying the predispositions and social constructs that we've set up for ourselves, reevaluating them, defining a lot of the words, for example, that we're using in self-talk, just to clear it up. Get the clouds to clear a little bit, and then we can get a little bit of a better signal. And it's really interesting, and
Yeah.
it's a great opportunity. I think is the biggest thing. And I guess going again full circle, the most important thing, the most important reason why I started doing the stuff that I've been doing with the daily dose, that's why it's very intentional, and I
Yeah.
intentionally marketed it that way. It's a daily thing, and most of us will take medicine as a daily dose, right? We'll pop a pill every day, right? Can I do this thing in 30 seconds that kind of substitutes a pill? Let's bring some perspective and start questioning some of the things that we're doing, and why are you unhappy, and what's making you unhappy, and we're our own worst enemy, and most of the time it's us that's making us unhappy. Things in life are pretty good. They really are, and it can always be worse. We need to get out of our way.
Yeah. Focusing on the positives and what you can
Yeah,
control instead of the negatives and the things that are out of your control, for sure.
and gratitude for sure, man.
Yeah.
Every day.
Awesome. As we're wrapping up here, just kind of more of a fun question for me of I've been curious on what your biggest takeaway has been, as you've started to put content out, something that you weren't expecting, whether it's been feedback, whether it's been, something within yourself, just, like something interesting, good or bad, that you weren't expecting or that you've really taken away from it.
What I've really Okay, so just because everything else has been a little heavy, I'll lighten it up to end a little bit. What I do not understand is I put myself out there in a vulnerable situation, and I think you understand who I am, and I feel like I understand who you are, and definitely see you. And I don't understand why, if I'm putting myself out to be vulnerable, and encouraging people to do something or give me feedback on something, why they won't do either of them. Okay, most of us want to be heard and we want to voice our opinions. And I'm finding out that most people are watching this stuff, but they're not liking it. Okay, which is fine. If you watch it and don't like it, then don't like it. Like, don't give me a like just because. But also, if you don't like it, tell me why you don't like it. Because I'm not just doing this. It brings me fulfillment. But the idea is if it can bring me fulfillment, I want to share stuff that can maybe also help somebody else. So if the stuff that I'm putting out there isn't helping somebody, then I'd like to know why and get the constructive criticism. It doesn't even need to be constructive, because I can take like the non-constructive stuff and make it constructive. And if somebody throws a brick at me, I'll build something with it, right? So that's been one of the most interesting parts, because I've also caught myself doing it too, where we'll watch something, consume and enjoy content, and we won't voice our opinion. The easiest place to voice our opinion is the internet. The hardest place to do it is in person. So that's been really interesting to me over the last week and a half, because it's hard to get a gauge where I want to do stuff, and right, I want to do stuff that brings me fulfillment, and being able to help people does bring me fulfillment. But if I'm the tool and I'm using the tool incorrectly, I'd like to know how I can use it correctly to make sure that I put stuff out there that that does what I want it to do. So that's probably been one of the most interesting pieces on a lighter note, I think. What about for you?
Um, Yeah, for me, and I love that answer by the way too. And I think like one little thing I want to say to that is I don't know if as a general population we've grasped the idea of what is just putting hatred out and what is constructive criticism, right? And
Yeah,
a lot of times I think that you do need a little bit more of that relationship with
yeah,
somebody to know where their intentions are. um, yeah, so very interesting. It wasn't the answer I was expecting, but really cool. But anyways, yeah, for me, it's been how much personal growth has come because of me putting things out, and that's been absolutely incredible. I've been extremely lucky where I haven't had much really negative feedback at all, and I think one of the biggest ones is I've gotten a couple of really positive, affirming messages privately from people. And I didn't realize how much those would mean to me. Like,
Yeah.
that positive affirmation and like feeling that they actually mean it,
Hmm.
has been a really cool feeling. And, like honestly is a feeling that I can't really describe, but has been really cool. And I always love getting those messages. So
Yeah. It's been the same for me
yeah,
too. Just comments here and there, and it's always hard to judge whether somebody likes you as a person. They're not going to tell you bad things, right? So, but it's been very affirming in that sense too. And yeah, just anything, any kind of feedback is good feedback. I think is the biggest thing.
for sure. Awesome. Before we head out here, any last minute things that you'd like to say or we didn't get to?
I don't think so. I think you're honestly, man. I think you're doing great. And I think I said that earlier this week to you. I mean, you called the podcast a journey, right? So, journey with Jared, and it is a journey, and journeys don't really have a start and end.
Yeah,
Like a trip or something usually has a destination and an end, but a journey is very kind of free will. And yeah, I think you're doing great. It's funny we talk about affirmation. We should always end it with affirmation then too, and gratitude too. Even reflecting earlier on this week when you and I met, I'm super grateful for our relationship, and even my experience this weekend. I'm super grateful for family too, and I think that daily gratitude is really important.
for sure. I
What
appreciate
about you?
your time. Thanks so much for
What
saying
do
it.
you?
Like, I really appreciate you coming back on here, and always love our conversations. And yeah, no, just thankful for everything. And I'll make sure to tag your account in everything where I'm posting, so people can take a look at the daily dose and
For sure.
hopefully give you some more feedback too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because last time too, you can check me out on Instagram at BSMITSS. I'm running the daily dose. Hit me up, slide into my DMs. I know there's a ton of people that you've been having on that are doing podcasts too. I'm always happy to have a conversation. So if you're watching this, you're out there. Like I said, slide into my DMs and give me some feedback, some constructive criticism, not blind affirmation. I think we get enough of that. I don't need any more blind affirmation, but just some feedback.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Cool.
And we'll chat soon.
Anytime, man. Take care.